fun.
Well, dear sister, thank you very much for being here with us. It's just, we've been looking forward to it, and we expect to have a good time.
I do too.
Okay. I thought that we might start with the time that we first became aware of Fay Bellamy, which was when you arrived in Atlanta around 1965, in the midst of many, many powerful things going on in the movement at that time. And I was just curious, before going back to your earlier period, if you could just remember out loud for us, what brought you to Atlanta in 1965? Why did you come?
Well, I had been looking for the movement. And I knew it was there because I'd been reading about it, but I didn't know where it was. I knew it was in the South somewhere, but I didn't know exactly where. And I didn't have an address.
You need an address for the movement. Huh?
Right. I didn't know how to join the movement. And so I came south. The first time I went to Florida, I said, well, it's in the South, I can find a movement from there. And you know, when you're a political person, such as I was, meaning that I really had no politics other than my own sense of right or wrong, or what I've been taught, or what you read in the paper, when organizations were organizing, the press would tell you about the essence of the event, but the organization didn't tell you how to come and join them, how to do that. So they would be telling people, join the movement, but they didn't tell you how to join, and that was significant to me. So I didn't really know how to join, and I didn't know people who were in this movement, but I knew that I wanted to be a part of it, so I went seeking.
Okay, and why did you want to be a part of it?
Well, I think experiences over from childhood. I remember my grandmother and my aunts who had left the South from Georgia, that's where they were from. My grandmother had 11 children, and she had sent her husband off to go north to find a job so she can get her kids out of Georgia because she wanted them to have some education. She didn't think about college, but she wanted them to be able to read, write, do numbers and basic things.
What part of Georgia were they from?
Albany, that area, southwest Georgia.
That's where our people are from too.
Oh, really?
Yes.
We might be cousins, huh?
Yes, yes.
My grandfather's name was Fordham. My grandmother's maiden name was White. And like I said, they had 11 children. She decided, she had all these girls. She wanted to get them out of the South, and she wanted to get her children, like I said, some education. So she told him, go north. So he went off, and he went to different places. He went to Florida, and he came back, and he brought all this grapefruits and these oranges and these things he was able to pick off the trees in Florida. He said, "Oh, lady, we going to Florida because you can pick the food off the trees." She said, "That ain't north, old man." So he had to get back out there and get to the north. So he went up to Pennsylvania and that D.C. area, and they were hiring people for these new steel mills and the coal mines and this, that, and the other. He got a job.
This was about when?
Ooh, I don't even know the time.
Okay.
But my mother was like probably about 3 years old, so probably was around probably at 1923, 24, something like that.
Okay.
And then he sent for his family. And so she brought all her children on the train, and she said people were trying to buy her children from her because they were so beautiful. And she had babies hidden up under her skirts when the conductor would come by for all these tickets. And so she got them north, though.
Good, good.
But the thing that impacted upon me was that why they had to leave. They weren't chased out per se, but why couldn't they stay and get an education?
Yes.
Why, if you were African or black, as some people might say, that you couldn't stay where you were and be treated as a decent person. And they would, you know, the children would be taken out to do sharecropping, farming. My grandfather did sharecropping. My grandmother framed pictures and hand-painted pictures. And one of the things her children remember is that everywhere she went, she took them with her. She had a buggy. She put the mattresses in the back of the buggy and the blankets, and everywhere she went, her children went with her. She'd go pick up her orders for framing or for delivering the pictures or whatever. And they remembered that continuity and that closeness and that awareness that you watch out for your own children as much as you possibly can.
Yes.
But the thing that impacted upon me in the interim was that I wanted to impact upon Georgia and the environments that wouldn't allow them to stay where they were and do what they had to do.
So you remembered that that was where you came from.
Yeah.
And you wanted to get back there.
Yeah, that's the first memory I have of that kind of situation.
Isn't that interesting? Well, that's so helpful. And I'd like to go back now to some of that earlier period that you were talking about. When you think about anything that might be called religion or spirituality or spirit, where do you first identify your coming in touch with something like that as far as your own childhood is concerned, Fay?
I think just from the teachings of my aunts, my mother died at a young age. She was 22 when she died of tuberculosis.
And how old were you then?
I was 4. My brother was 3. We're 11 months apart. And our aunts, like in many families, took the children. My father tried to give us away to somebody else because he had a mean spirit at that time. He didn't know any better, but he learned.
Yes,
and my aunt said, and he gave us to people in Winston-Salem, North Carolina to take care of us that he didn't even know, but he knew their daughter, and he trusted her, and therefore he trusted her family. But we still were not at home. And we had all these aunts who said, no, this is not going to occur. And he told them, well, if you go get them, I'm going to have you arrested. They said, well, get ready to call the police because we're going to get them. And so they came and got us and took us back home. And that family togetherness, that strength, that aggressiveness that said, this is not correct, was like a lesson to me also.
Yes,
I don't know if I call it spirituality.
Why not?
But it was like
Why not?
Okay. And we knew we didn't want to be there. The people weren't treating us wrong, mean, or any kind of way like that. But we knew it wasn't our home, and we wanted to be with people we knew.
Yes.
I think most children would probably feel that way.
Yes, yes.
Also in the teachings of them, they would send us to church. I never really understood church. I like church. I like the celebrations that people who are religious or involved in situations create. I like to see people shout and get off, you know. But I used to say, God, please don't let me shout. I don't want to do that. But I can enjoy and appreciate those who enjoy doing that. I know it's just not me.
And you enjoyed that back when you were a child?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the music. I enjoyed the energy. But I didn't particularly enjoy the messages because I didn't really understand them. I understood the teachings that came out of my home more than I understood the teachings that came out of church.
Do you remember the name of the church or the denomination?
Right now I can't remember. It just went blank on me.
Right.
But I'll recall it.
Okay.
And so
the Baptist church.
You started, was that when you were in North Carolina or after you came back?
Oh no, I was only in North Carolina maybe half a year or so.
Okay.
So from the rest of the period of time I was back in Clareton, Pennsylvania.
So it was your aunties in that area who introduced you to the church and the excitement of the church.
Right. Now they didn't go to church. That
Why
often.
do you think that was the case?
Well, I think they were busy. One of the things was the main aunt, my Aunt Mary Jones, who ran the house and was like the glue. Although my grandmother lived there, but she was a strong person. She made the money, and women, African women, couldn't get jobs like that were decent or wholesome or regular unless you cleaned somebody's house. You couldn't work in the steel mill. You couldn't work in a dental office. You couldn't get the training. So people created jobs for themselves. So she sold alcohol. She rented rooms. We had a large house that had about 22 rooms. So she had a boarding house.
You lived in there too?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had all these experiences.
Right.
She sold dinners. When people got paid from the mill every second week, then they had card games and kitty to the house. So she was always making money, and she was always setting some aside and making sure that she was in control of her situation and that we never had any needs or that were not met.
What was her name?
Mary L. Jones.
Mary L. Jones. Was she a kind of model for you, you think?
I think she was a model for our family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that, you were saying, was even more important to you, that spirit that you found there in your aunt and in the other aunts in the family, that spirit was even more important to you than anything that you found in church.
Definitely.
In terms of spirit
Right.
and spirituality. Do you think that that spirit affected you in any way?
Oh, I'm sure it did, because it taught me that you are in charge of yourself. You can go to church, you can put on airs, you can look like this or the other, or pretend to be this, but you know who you are. You check yourself. And you can lie, you can two-time, you can cheat, but you are checking out that you're the one that's cheating, you're the one that's lying. And I think it affects and impacts upon you. And those are the kind of things they would teach. It's not about other people checking you.
Right.
You're in charge of you. And that's still with me.
Well, all over the world, in faith traditions everywhere, Fay, that spirit of deep self-responsibility is considered spirit and spirituality.
Okay.
So
Okay.
you're hooked up.
I'll go with that.
All right.
Yeah.
What do you remember about that family besides the things that you've just mentioned? What was important about that family for you?
Well, they didn't have envy or jealousy of other people. I don't remember them talking about people or downing people. And even when I would be angry with my father as a child, they would say, "You can't say that about your father." And I said, "Why not? You know, he did this, he did that." You know, my little anger. They said, "It doesn't matter, he's your father." And it was a lesson I learned in that I don't see a lot of people maintaining that in this day and age, because a mother will get mad with the father and they'll talk it over with the child, or the reverse, the father will get mad and talk about the mother. And that was something they would not tolerate. You did not talk to the children about the anger that might exist within the family on an adult level, because the child was not capable of understanding and measuring that all out. That there were certain things that were for children, and there were certain things for adults, and you should not confuse the two. And I think that was very healthy, that they didn't allow me to do that and get away with that, because that was not my role. And I couldn't judge my father. I couldn't change his ways. I'm his child. I have to deal with him as he is. And I'm getting a little emotional.
That's wonderful. Oh, it was a great lesson to learn, wasn't it?
I think so. It really was, because I think about it a lot. And I look at some of the stories and the movies and the events and the kind of experiences people are having, and they're including their children. I think it's very corrupt of them to do that. It means they have no knowledge of self as an adult, and that there are separations, and that there's one reason you're a child, and there's another reason you're an adult, and the two don't necessarily mix.
When you were growing up with other children, what sort of children did you find yourself connecting to?
Children who were not followers of everybody, people who had their own mind. And most of my friends got up and got on out of Clairton. Most of them, male and female, has some kind of substantial life even as adults. Clairton was a very tiny town. There was a lot of mischief going on in the town, as you well know, like any town. And you had, as a child, you had a chance to see some of the mischief and make decisions, you know. And a lot of my friends, some of them have made very good lives for themselves, and that's been impressive to me. And they're still very strong people, they're thinking people. Some of them are very caring people, and that's been a positive, a plus for me. I didn't have a lot of friends. I was kind of a loner, but those I did associate with were like that.
Fay, where was Clairton, or where is it in terms
It's
of?
about 16 miles west of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it used to be a United States steel mill there that ran, I think it was the Monongahela River or the Allegheny River that flows that area. And the steel mill sits right on it. And then you have next town is Elizabeth, flows right on it. So you had a long steel mill area. And you also had chemical plants and things there. And that was the industry. And even as a young woman, I remember us talking about how if the steel mill closed, what would happen to Clairton? Because it's like so many towns, including Detroit. One industry towns, you're really company towns. Because when the company leaves, the town falls apart. It can't sustain itself. And that's what's happened in Clairton. Right now, Clairton is doesn't even have a tax base because it doesn't have any industry there.
So was your father working in the steel mill?
Yeah, he retired from the mill.
Did you have any contact with the mills directly yourself?
I got up and got on. Well, I was interested in business school, and when I finished high school in Clairton, I went to a business school for a year in Pittsburgh, did a little court reporting and stuff like that. Administrative things seemed to draw me. So, and I tried to get a job in Pittsburgh, and it was like a situation where you had to go to the dentist for him to tell you where a job might be, because you were black. There were no employment agencies per se at that time for African people. And I really didn't like being in that kind of situation. To me, it was like being in Georgia. So I decided really years before that I was going to travel. I had an aunt who used to travel. She'd been in the military. She lived in New York and worked. She'd come home. She'd gone other places. So that was what kind of hooked me.
What's her name?
Her name is Clara Tillman, and she's 87 years old now. And she lives in Florida. And she's taking care of her 97-year-old sister.
You got some powerful women.
Yeah, they're strong,
Yes.
and they're healthy.
Yes.
Clara hasn't been to a doctor until like recently for her eyes for glaucoma in like 30 years. And the other aunt has probably never been to a doctor. The one is 97 in her life.
How do you account for that?
Well, she was always a little bit different. And she, even as a child, because I asked them, I said, has she always been like this? They said, yeah. She was dealing with herbs. She was boiling her water. She was very eccentric in her way of her life, and she much was a loner herself. And she walked everywhere. And that's the only thing I can account for. And her spirituality. Her name is Salima Omar. She changed her name about 60 years ago. And of course, the family never would call her Salima. They always call her sister, because they couldn't tolerate the fact that she had gone to some kind of religious Never land that they couldn't identify with. And it changed her name. What's wrong with our family's name?
Yes.
And I'm sure that's not unusual.
Where did she get Salima from?
I don't know. It's an Arabic sounding name. Salima Omar, and I've never been able to identify what her religious or spiritual thing is, but she's always been into some aspect of that in her prayers and reading dreams or interpreting dreams. And people would come to her for advice and counsel in the community because, you know, long before there were quote unquote psychiatrists and a Freud, she was around giving advice.
Yes.
You know? So, and I found there are many people like that in the community. And I've even had people come to me on occasion, and I said, why are they coming to me? You know, and I would talk to them and talk to them, then they would come back a year later and tell me why they had come to me.
Yes.
And so you just never know how it's going to affect you.
So you're carrying on that tradition.
Yeah,
of
without
women.
knowing it. But that's not my intent.
When you were a child and a young woman, what was your intent? What did you see yourself being or doing in the future?
Well, I wanted to participate in changing the way the world was.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know how it would be done or that I would even do it. But I knew I wanted to do something that was different from what was going on around me. And when I was 13, I started working in a drugstore, a pharmacy, and I used to be the soda jerk and the cashier. And always
This was
had
right
access.
in Clairton?
This is in Clairton. And I would work part-time after school sometimes and on the weekends. And I had access to all these magazines and this literature. And I remember reading, at 16, I remember reading about Emmett Till. And I know it had a definite impact on me. And I remember then that at this point in time, something will occur.
Yes. Yes. So many people had their life deeply affected by that boy's death.
And the way it was done, a
Yes.
child.
Yes.
I need a Kleenex.
All right. Hold for just a second and let's see if we can get a Kleenex for our sisters. Does anybody have one?
I've got.
That's good. That's good tears. That's good tears.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
You tell us when you're ready, okay? Yes.
Takes a minute.
It's all right.
Sure.
It's all right.
Take your time.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you for sharing your tears with us. Kevin, we're ready whenever you are, okay? Okay, good. Good. Fay, was there any discussion in your family or among your friends about that Emmett Till murder?
Not in my family, per se, and not among my friends particularly. It was something that people were shocked by, it's just in general, in terms of the community at large. But I don't remember discussions per se about it.
Why did Fay Bellamy take it so deeply and so seriously?
I've often wondered, but I think things come to you through your spirit.
Yes.
And if you know enough to listen to it and take direction sometimes, it'll guide you. And I think my spirit was trying to tell me something because I was asking for directions. And I knew that life was larger than Clariton. I knew life was larger than Fay. And I wanted to participate in that aspect of it.
Right.
And you don't know what the direction will be, but you know you're going to go out and find a direction. And I think it's like people who travel or do meaningful things in other kinds of ways. You don't know where it comes from, because I've asked people, well, why did you choose this profession? What interests you about feet that you want to be a podiatrist? You know, why are you messing with earlobes? I mean, you just don't know.
But what you knew was that you had to be involved in changing things.
Yeah. I wanted to be a part of change and not really knowing what that meant. Because in my family, they didn't really talk about change, and they never talked about white people particularly, which was very interesting, being from Georgia. And they didn't talk about people negatively, period. So that probably was a plus for me without my even knowing it. So you have these lessons coming at you from these different areas, and they bombard you, and you don't know which one's going to take hold of you.
Did the family talk at all about why they left Georgia and what life was like while they were there?
Not particularly. They didn't seem to have a hard life. They never talked about being downtrodden. They never talked about being hungry. They talked about being barefoot but that was what, you know, you didn't need shoes in the environments where they were, particularly unless you were going to church or school. But not being educated or being allowed to have education was a big minus, because it was something being inflicted upon you against your will that you didn't have a choice in. To me, that was a big part of struggle.
That became central for a lot of people, that determination to change that kind of situation.
Yeah, also you have young women in an environment where white males could attach themselves to them and not suffer any damage because of it. So you had she had 7 girls, beautiful young women, and I'm sure she must have been thinking about, I can't let my kids grow up in this environment. There has to be other kinds of things they can do. For my family's interests, it's best that I do something different. And I know even today, several people who, they have 1 child, not 11, and they've gone back to college because they say, now that I have this child deserves more then I can give it at this time. And so they do something for the child. And I think that's what she was doing. She was doing something for her children, more so than for herself.
Mm. This was your grandmother?
Yes.
Mm. What do you remember most about her in this earlier period?
Well, I remember she's a very aggressive lady. I remember she was a fighter, you know. But I think my aunt took the characteristics of her mother and incorporated all of that and then some. Mm. Because she even took over from her mother in running the household. And it wasn't that my grandmother was decrepit, she was not. And she was very warm, very loving, very affectionate to her grandchildren, and not perfect, but she was a good grandmother.
This was your Aunt Mary that you talked about?
My grandmother.
But,
her mother.
Okay, her mother.
Yeah.
But your Aunt Mary is the one who raised
She raised basically my brother and myself, okay, along with my Aunt Clara on the side and some other aunts dipping in, you know. And I had one aunt who went to church religiously, Aunt Alta, cook, and like we'd be trying to skip church and she'd come outside church and make sure all the kids went inside, you know, so it was always one of those. But Aunt Mary became the mainstay of the household. She was the one that didn't suffer the jealousy or the envy. She was the one that anybody outside the family or inside the family could come to for assistance, and she could give it, she would give it. She was the one that showed appreciation and love on a consistent basis. It never varied. You know, she was always the same. And she didn't question you. She didn't judge you. You know, she tried to be very fair. And I just found her much more stronger, even than her mother.
What did she look like?
She was about 5'5", and she was a large woman. She was kind of fat, but, you know, men like fat women, so she didn't have a problem. She was married a couple of times. She was very aggressive about her household. She didn't allow any cursing around the children. She didn't allow any kind of out-of-hand behavior in front of the children. What they did when she sold the liquor or she had the jukebox in the basement, we were allowed in that environment, but people had to, whoever they were, they had to conduct themselves in a certain way in that environment when we children were present. You know, even her card games. You know, ladies would come from the other places and they would have card games all day long. The week of the payday, she'd be getting that money in. So she was consistent, and she was very thorough, very neat lady. But she was just somebody that was always there to any of us, not just to me and my brother.
You really sound as if so much that was important about life and about being a human being and about having a real human spirit was given to you right in that home situation.
That's where I feel I got it from.
Yes.
I really do. I really don't feel that I got it from church. And because they talked about hypocrites, you know, and backsliding. And so you learn early, like with people who would join and they would commit to being this kind of situation or this kind of person or going to do these kinds of things, then they would backslide, they'd point that out. And so you learn what hypocrisy was. And you learn that people really, they didn't have to be hypocritical. They didn't have to go to church and declare this. They could just be themselves and do that same thing. But some people had the need to, like, in the community, to show themselves as possibly being something else, but they would backslide and become whatever else they were before. And so you learned about hypocrisy. I remember there also were situations where I decided as a young woman, I said, well, I'm not going to have a man that lies to me because it doesn't make sense to me. Because lying hurts your feelings. And in Clareton, there are a lot of people, because it's a small town, a lot of people lie because of the kind of environment they think they're in. And some people will be married 20 years and have a girlfriend 13 years, you know, that kind of stuff. And it's not abnormal in the world as we know it, but I decided I didn't like that, and I still don't like it. I don't think it makes any sense, to, you know, even to this day, because it causes so much confusion.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Good.
Take a break.